Welcome to Casting Light, everyone. I'm Jayla Mamadova, and we have with us today a very close friend of mine, Jessie Date-Ampofo. Jessie works in ethical trade. Her background is in business and human rights, and she focuses on the empowerment for garment workers. She also researches brand compatibility against sustainability criteria to determine which brands are transparent about their efforts. Jessie earned her master's from the School of Oriental and African Studies from the University of London. Jessie, I'm so excited to have this conversation with you and just on a personal note, just to learn more about this space. But let's get started learning more about yourself, how you've come to be passionate about this space, and especially how you've navigated in terms of establishing yourself in a relatively new category in the fashion industry.
Oh, well, thanks for having me, first of all, Jaylon. I'm excited to be here. So for me, my background started in high school, just my interest in making the world a better place, in international development, and how I could help vulnerable populations. So going into university, my undergrad degree was in political science and international relations, and I was very interested in the different structures and institutions like the United Nations, and even on a domestic level, what efforts countries had in place for their individuals and for their citizens to make sure people had basic social safety nets, which, for example, now we're seeing how important those are. So coming out of undergrad, I was in the nonprofit sector first, which is kind of the categorical place you would go if you are interested in, like, quote unquote, saving the world, which is what I thought the mission was at the time. And from there, I felt that change was definitely being made. There was progress and passion. Salaries were challenging, I have to say. And so I started to look at other avenues for how I could still have that same outcome of helping people, making the world a better place, but possibly being paid more for it. Also seeing what other avenues were available beyond the nonprofit side of things. So for me, that meant looking into businesses, corporate structures, more internally seeing how companies were making change for people in their supply chains. Like a lot of people in the ethical fashion space, my big awakening was Rana Plaza. And so when that garment factory collapsed and killed about 1,300 garment workers, and that was my first time seeing that on the global stage, that there were these people just like myself and yourself who were working just like we're working, but they were getting the very short end of the stick, whereas the people at the top of those supply chains were making a lot of money. And I was very interested in that disparity and what I could do to help. So now I'm working on the corporate side of things, and I'm really enjoying it so far. I work with a lot of passionate people who have similar backgrounds to me, and it's really nice to go into a workspace and be able to talk to people about, how we can make our supply chains better and how we can make the company a better place for everyone, including ourselves, to work. So yeah, that's my short career.
It is interesting, Jessie, that you noted the Rana Plaza events and how that prompted you to make that shift into the ethical fashion industry. So, when we think about the shifts that the industry has made, really beyond the sourcing of material since the Plaza events, and really incorporating key sustainability metrics in labor and factories, has that happened?
Yeah, I think so. To be honest, I think it was starting before Rana Plaza, at least the movement to better represent garment workers or people who are not as audible in supply chains. So I think Rana Plaza was just an awakening for people like myself who were not aware of how some of those structures worked. And so seeing it in the news, the headlines, the images were very disturbing and memorable. And so I think from there, there was a lot of public push and outcry, and consumer-driven advocacy, which has pushed brands to do even more than the initial lip service or maybe the minimal initiatives they were doing before. So I think now there is, especially from the consumer side, a big push to not just do something here or there, but what does your supply chain look like? does your company represent the values that I have? Do I want to buy from you if you don't represent my values? If I'm seeing images of, women injured on the job, or I'm hearing that they're making pennies for this t-shirt I'm making, how does that make me feel? How, and especially with the current generations, I think they're very advocacy driven. And so there's a lot of push on that side, which is great. I think the government side and legislation regulation has to catch up to that a bit. And we're not seeing as much of that in my opinion. But I think from the consumer side and now the corporate side, we're seeing some self-driven initiatives. And there is a lot of debate as to whether companies doing the drive themselves to be more sustainable and ethical is actually effective. But from what I can see, there's definitely more being done than 10 years ago.
What does the consumer push look like?
So from the consumer side, what I've seen that has been effective is most recently the Pay Up campaign, which was driven by a nonprofit called Remake, where we were seeing, I think it was over 100,000 people have signed the petition now, which was asking brands to pay for orders that they've had to cancel, being in a tough position due to COVID, et cetera. So we're seeing a lot of brands had to respond to that. Quite a few brands turned around and said, okay, we will pay for those orders and pay those workers. So from what I can see, consumers have huge power. I think there are some challenges though on that side. For example, affordability and accessibility. If the true cost of a pair of jeans is actually $120 to make sure everyone along the supply chain is being paid fairly, not everyone can afford that. But let's say you need black jeans for your shift for work, what are you supposed to do? So you are more likely to go to a fashion retailer and get the items that you need. And I think that's one of the challenges, is that there are a lot of well-meaning consumers who want to be more sustainable, but some of the products at the moment, which are fully sustainable on the environmental and social side, are out of their price range. And that's something I've definitely noticed. But that said, I think I'm seeing a lot more content and understanding from consumers as well that there are other ways to be sustainable. So prior to COVID, there were a lot of clothing swaps happening, where you would just exchange clothes that are in good condition, you just don't want to wear them anymore, and you would get some other items in return that you can then wear. So it's the feeling of getting something new that you haven't worn, but without actually contributing to mass product that will go to landfill. Other ways we've seen consumers saying, I'm not going to wash my clothes as often, or I'm going to use cold water. There are so many different ways to be sustainable now, and I think the education piece is crucial, which is why I've been really encouraged by how consumers are trying to get more educated about how they can be sustainable. So on that side, I think that is encouraging, and ideally I would like to see that continue, and for more people, basically before you go to the store, ask yourself, am I going to wear this 30 times? How am I going to take care of it? Do I see it lasting me for years? And do I actually need the product? Do I need to consume at all? Those would be some key things to keep in mind. And I'm seeing more consumers asking those questions, which is great. On the government, I was just going to say, on the government side, there are some regulations. I think there's more international cooperation, which is great, like the Paris Accord, for example. And there are some local initiatives. We'll see cities try to become green cities or green areas at least. And those initiatives are all great, but I'm not seeing as much of a cohesive, collaborative approach globally to combating climate change and sustainability in general.
Jessie, when we think about, and maybe this was my research, but there seems to be very different definitions of what sustained fashion is, or at least a variation in the definition of it. So a very simple question, but when we think about our audience and how they should be thinking about the definition of ethical trade or sustainable fashion, terms being used interchangeably, could you just shed light on what the meaning and the crux of it means? What are kind of the guidelines. And in the introduction that I mentioned is looking at that sustainability criteria. What does that encompass?
That is a great point. Sustainability tends to have such a varied definition, almost person to person, which is very tricky for trying to make some cohesive progress. So for me, sustainability is comprehensive, both the environment side, so looking at waste, water, carbon emissions, your overall impact on what producing that product is going to do on the environment. And it also encompasses the social side, which is worker rights, well-being, wages especially is an important one, and then health and safety, general working conditions. If I'm going to this factory, am I safe there, working there? So those would be the key points for me. I think one area that I've seen have some division is that, especially with different companies where sustainability means being green. So there are some companies who will take pride in being a zero carbon emissions company, or carbon neutral tends to be more popular, to be honest, because they're all still emitting carbon, but maybe they will plant some trees to supplement that. But so for example, saying that you are carbon neutral and you're really excited about that, and you market yourself and you really believe it, that you are a sustainable company because you are carbon neutral, but you don't know where your materials are coming from. Was it, was there child labor involved in picking the cotton that then goes to your carbon neutral site where it's made? Like, how do you know? So for me, it's that fully comprehensive, looking at both sides, social and environmental, and doing the least amount of harm possible, or in fact, doing no harm at all. That would be my definition of sustainability in fashion.
Jessie, when you look at and to the extent that you're comfortable, whether it is going into certain names or not, when you think about fast fashion and the names, when you think about that pool of companies, which would you say, or how many of those, have been incorporating either a sustainability division or an effort in terms of actually incorporating these sustainability criteria? So just in terms of understanding whether most of the work is being done at these boutique, smaller shops that have these higher price tags, or this is something that's meaningfully being incorporated into the fast fashion industry.
Yeah, so from what I'm seeing, I think nearly every major company has some sort of sustainability or ethics, corporate social responsibility team, even if it's a small team of a few people. I think the challenge is how much is getting done, what are the targets, are the targets incorporated into the wider business strategy? So is it that if it comes down to it, we pick profit over people, or is it, if it comes down to it, we've said that people are important and we'll take a hit to revenue if needed? So I think that's where it's important to look, because I'm sure you've seen like tons of brands have their collections now that are sustainable, and maybe a few products here or there, which is great. It's moving in the right direction. But is that same level of effort being incorporated throughout the supply chain and throughout product development as a whole? So it's easy to think, and I know some transparency reports have come out this year that have said some brands are better than others, but even looking at those, how much are they actually doing? And like, how transparent are they actually? So always good to keep in mind.
And maybe just taking a step back, Jessie, when we think about from the audience standpoint, especially for those that are interested in this area and maybe are looking to establish a career, establish themselves professionally in this space, how would you, or what would be your advice in terms of navigating this landscape? And again, it does feel like a newer industry, and especially as you mentioned, with more and more corporations incorporating sustainability divisions, but so much work yet to be done. What would be the right areas of, I guess, academic focus, or is there even a proper academic profile or a level of preparation that you would recommend for someone trying to enter this? how should they go about spotting the right organizations in terms of starting their career in this area?
So the good thing is there are more and more opportunities as brands and consumers are really pushing to get things done. I think there are way more jobs and different kinds of jobs available than even a few years ago. So there's no set career. I have seen more specific degrees come out more recently that are specifically about sustainability or specifically about the environment. But I think you can honestly study anything and incorporate it into sustainability. It's really about making the world a better place, but focusing on people, the planet, and profit as well. So I think there are many different avenues you can take to get into the fields, or many different backgrounds you can have to still work in the fields. I think the biggest challenge is that it's a bit of a hidden field. I think it's hard to find opportunities. One thing I struggled with was networking initially, and I cannot stress enough how important that is if you are interested in a career, probably in anything, but especially in this space. It helps to start getting to know people, talk to them about what the work they do is, because every opportunity is different, every company operates differently when it comes to sustainability. Knowing what people are working on will help you get a sense of, is this a fit for me? Is this what I see myself doing? And also, is this company doing enough? Am I going to feel like I'm actually making change or progress in this space? So definitely reach out to people is my number one piece of advice. Like, network as much as you can. And it's challenging, but there are a lot more sustainability professionals on Twitter now, for example, LinkedIn. And I think because it's such a small space, I would hope that most of us are pretty open to helping out and answering any questions that people might have. Like, for example, I know I am. So definitely reach out to people. That is key. I think you can look online. You might see some job postings, but I don't think that fully encompasses the opportunities that are available. It can often be pretty internal as well. So hiring someone from another department to then start a sustainability area or to be on the sustainability team. So if you're working in another space, in another company or nonprofit, see, is there a way that you can sort of streamline your way into sustainable work? One thing that I did before I was working in the field was work on a social responsibility committee at the previous place where I worked. And that gave me some experience, though that wasn't my key job function. So there are different ways to get involved and gain the experience that you need. Try volunteering. There are a lot of internships in this space. I, for one, I'm not an advocate for unpaid internships, but that is what you will find in a lot of areas, including this. So be open-minded, try to volunteer if you can, but otherwise just network as much as you can. That's the key thing.
Jessie, I remember when you were studying up and getting yourself prepared for this field, location seemed to be a factor. Is it a significant factor in this industry where you are, whether in a city or in a or maybe in a in a small or a relatively a smaller area?
Yeah, so again, it depends on the kind of work you want to do. So I have a specific interest in fashion. My background is looking at garment supply chains. So that is pretty specifically what I was interested in. And most fashion companies in the US are either in New York or they're in California. And then in Europe, a lot of them are in London. So those were the key areas that I was looking. For other areas, I know there's a lot in agriculture available. Food and grocery is starting to have a lot of sustainability positions. Mining as well, mining and jewelry. So it really depends on what kind of industry you're looking for and what you're interested in. And from there, you can see where those companies are concentrated. But I think one good thing is that sustainability I think it's getting to the point where every company will have to think about it in some way, even if you work in a small office and you use paper cups for coffee. How can you make those more sustainable? How can you find an alternative for the printer paper you're using in your office? So it can be done anywhere, but if you're specifically looking at companies and industries, it definitely helps to look at where those main hubs are and where the companies in those industries are concentrated.
Jessie, in preparation of our discussion today, when just reading through, and oftentimes in my own mind has come up when I've seen these sustainability campaigns, is this kind of a philanthropic effort on the part of the large brand name, or is some of these milestones a bit hypocritical? So both from the standpoint of, first of all, how you see it and how you think we should be assessing it, but also from the viewer standpoint, in terms of me joining or selecting organizations to apply and be part of. How should we be disaggregating those two and drawing the distinction between where these efforts are done for the right purposes and where there is a hypocritical element and the milestones are more of a nod to appease or to just meet some of those criteria superficially?
That is a great question. There is a lot of greenwashing in the field, so which is the case when a company or an organization says, we are producing, let's say, this T-shirt, which is sustainable, and they like blast it everywhere, and it's in their adverts and their commercials, and you as a consumer who is looking for sustainable products, or you want your products to be more sustainable, you get excited and you go and buy that product. And it turns out that actually it's made in a factory where people are being paid like pennies. And yes, there's some sustainable cotton, but the material is maybe 5%. And I think we've seen some brands getting called out for that in the past few years, like H&M, for example, on their Conscious collection. So, which is not to say that they are, in some cases, trying to be deceitful, but what they consider sustainable, their bar may be way lower than where it needs to be or where you need it to be based on your values. So if a company is saying this product has, 5% sustainable materials, and for you that's not enough, which it shouldn't be enough, then that's something you want to take into consideration. So you really can't go by that face value, hey, this is sustainable, or hey, we are a good company. You really need to do your research, ask those questions. You can write to companies, they should be able to respond and give you an answer about who actually made your clothes. If they can't, that's a huge warning sign that they have no idea what's going on down at the bottom of their supply chain. And it's not good at all. They should have the resources to be able to do that. So greenwashing is something to stay clear of, and it's a huge problem in the industry.
What are some good questions to ask in an interview, Jessie? And maybe just going off your process, what would be some intelligence questions to ask in an interview with an ethical fashion company?
I would ask what kind of backgrounds your future coworkers will have. That will help you get a sense of if it seems like everyone in your department has a background in marketing, that's probably a red flag. You would want people who hopefully have, it doesn't need to be, but ideally some sort of background in environmental studies, in international development, in human rights. That will kind of show you that they have the knowledge and the understanding of some of the key issues versus trying to make what is going on sound better, if that makes sense, which marketing can tend to be. So definitely what kind of backgrounds does the rest of the team have? What kind of projects have you worked on recently that will let you know, is it actually face value things, or is it, again, something like a marketing campaign about something sustainable? How in-depth and thorough is the program that will help you figure that out? So those would be the two main questions I would ask: the background of the rest of the team and what it is they're actually working on.
That's so interesting. So if the team is consistent with people with a lot of a marketing background, that is problematic.
I would think so, because to me that means you're more focused on communications, and communications are great because it does mean that you are let's say you do have a good picture of your supply chain, and maybe you just don't know how to communicate to people that, yes, we do know how much people are being paid or who's making the clothes and where they are. So yeah, you do need communications to be able to let consumers know and be transparent, but it shouldn't be the case that you're just putting out fires, if that makes sense. So people are saying, oh, you're doing this, and you have a marketing team ready just to quell the flames of when people get upset. There should be a thorough and very structural program that you have, which is targeting the environment and social aspects of sustainability. So you want to make sure that you have people on the team who are equipped to do that. And it is a big job. You are not going to change the world. It's very slow moving, as if you're doing it from the corporate side especially. And also if you're doing it from the nonprofit side, because you don't have that internal power to make a brand change its policies. You can advocate and you can push, and that certainly has its place and it's important, but you're not actually making those changes. So overall, it's a very slow moving progress. So you need to be prepared for that. You're not going to go in and do an initiative and that's it, ethical fashion is solved. So you definitely want to make sure that the team you're working with and the projects or the program that the company has in place are actually going to be doing what you need them to do.
Okay, so Jessie, you mentioned the H&M consciousness line. Is that what it, or conscious line?
Conscious collection, yeah.
Conscious collection, that being problematic, and we saw also from companies like ASOS where they just kind of ban a particular use of a material, or but most of the damage, as you said, it comes out of the factory. So should we be interpreting that also as just a marketing ploy and just saying, okay, we're not going to be using cashmere silk, or we're just going to be cutting down cotton by X amount of percent? How should we be diving in terms of what criteria they have incorporated? And also, I remember when you were preparing yourself to venture into this industry, you were doing studying on the side. What did that take you? What kind of courses should our viewers take, or are there online materials readily available to study that criteria in ethical trade specific to the fashion industry?
Yeah, so always be aware of greenwashing, I think. For me, I would say I would rather that H&M have a conscious collection than not have one, because at least it's something. What is problematic is when it's then marketed as we are sustainable because we have this line, when that line, first of all, is not fully sustainable, and your full business model is also not fully sustainable. So then it becomes misleading. And with ASOS, I'm not too familiar with the example you used, but it's essentially the same thing, where it's fine if you were doing these initiatives. A lot of companies are, and a lot of them are really good initiatives which are making a difference at the local level of the supply chain, and that's the key thing. However, it just needs to be clarified whether the initiative is being incorporated structurally into the full business model, or if it's just a one-off here or there, which is not going to bring tangible change, and that's not going to change the system that we currently have. So how are we making these full business models which incorporate sustainability and incorporate human rights across the board rather than one-offs?
And in terms of materials study, Jessie, because I know you, I would see you, sitting with a pack and going through materials. So was that readily available, or is there coursework that you would recommend to take?
Yeah, that's a good point. I would say there are definitely ways you can prep yourself. There are a lot of free courses online now. I used Coursera, and FutureLearn, I think, is the other one, and IDEO has a few courses as well, or Acumen. But those courses were all just background, so that in addition to my master's, which was really theoretical, I wanted some practical knowledge because I knew I wanted to work in fashion, but I didn't have that background of how do you source materials? How do you purchase? How do you work with a supplier? So those additional courses, which all of those websites I mentioned had free courses, gave me that knowledge and that background. I also took some classes at FIT, the Fashion Institute in New York, and I did sustainable manufacturing, um, and there was a few more, but they were very tangible, practical courses with experts who had worked in the field, who were able to teach us about pattern making and things that I'm not doing those functions on my day-to-day job, but working in a fashion company, it helps if I understand how things work. Um, and it makes it easier for me to make business cases for some of these sustainability initiatives if I understand what the business priorities and goals are and how that corporate structure works. So definitely read, take courses if you can. There are some nonprofits like Remake I mentioned where they do a huge education piece and you can get updated that way, more on the human rights side of things, but definitely stay updated and try to get as much knowledge as you can. None of it was wasteful.
Is there an opportunity to specialize in any aspect of the supply chain?
Yeah, I don't think you need to specialize. Some people do, but that might actually limit your opportunities in a space where the jobs are already quite limited. So I think being more general and flexible, and because each company operates differently, you won't fully know the work that you're doing until you get in and are actually doing it. But the different parts of the supply chain, so from the very beginning, sourcing the raw materials that are then taken to a factory where production happens, which are then transported and distributed in, a retail store or e-commerce. There are several different levels or layers to the whole supply chain. When you're doing sustainability, you would be looking at the full supply chain. Typically, you wouldn't focus on one area. There are some specialists now in like packaging, for example, or transport and delivery, which sustainability there is usually reducing carbon emissions or finding packaging that's not damaging to the earth or, to end up in a landfill. So biodegradable substitutes, for example. So I've seen some specialization there where more science is required, but for the rest of it, I think being a generalist, at least to start off, would be beneficial.
And Jessie, as we're talking about materials, vegan leather always, or vegan materials are always prompted as sustainable. Could you maybe talk about how environmentally friendly these vegan materials are, or again, it's more of a marketing ploy rather than actually being a sustainable use of materials?
Yeah, so it is tricky. I think sustainable materials in general are pretty tricky. I haven't come across any purely sustainable material where if you use this, you're doing no harm to the environment and you're doing no harm to humans, on the social side as well. But with leather, like we know that the leather industry is harmful for the environment. We definitely know that. But some of the leather substitutes, or most of them, are also made of materials that are synthetic, like polyester or polyester blends, which cannot biodegrade, so they end up in landfill. You still have to dye them, which uses strong chemicals, and that's not beneficial to the environment as well. And then we also don't have clarity often times of where they're produced and who is actually dyeing them. Do they have the right equipment to protect them from the dyes and any chemicals as well? So I think there's some growth in that area that is happening. So for example, there's pineapple leather, we've seen some mushroom leather, and those are great as well, but some of the same issues persist. For example, having to dye the leather or the fake leather to be the color that you want. What kind of natural dye can you use? Are there any available? So there are many challenges there. There are some other materials we've seen like viscose, or which is produced from wood pulp. And that was very favorable for a while. I had a lot of viscose, but now it's leading to deforestation. So there's no perfect solution. So again, it comes down to what your values are, trying not to consume or overconsume in the first place, making do with what you have and mending when you can. But when you do need to get something, my recommendation would be to get something that's not so blended, because then it's harder to pull the materials apart if you do end up recycling that material. I know people think that donating is a great solution, but a lot of the donations can end up in landfill as well, or flooding third world markets where they don't need, your junk either. So those are things to keep in mind. If you're going to donate clothes, ask, where is this going? If you can't resell or give this away, where does the product go? Because that's what's going to happen to a lot of the product. It's going to go to that last category. So definitely ask. And so going for organic cotton is a huge thing, but that's very water intensive. So there really is no perfect solution. I think there needs to be a lot more innovation in the space. And then for some of the cool things we're seeing, like mushroom leather, apple leather, we need those to be more mainstream. So right now they're produced in very small amounts. They're hard to get. They're more expensive, so companies aren't incentivized, unfortunately, to pick those up. So we need to see a lot more of those kinds of products becoming mainstream and more development in the textile space in general.
I was going to ask you about the high price tag, which you noted earlier, and you just mentioned these materials being much more expensive. Do you have a sense of what the price differential of that looks like, and in general, what are the drivers of the of the higher price tags that we're seeing on goods from ethical brands?
Yeah, I don't know the exact, but just based on my own research, at least a third to 2 times more in price, and that's just for the raw materials. So from there, you still need to produce it and make it a product and possibly pay extra to dye it, etc. So there is a significant price difference. I think as these products become more mainstream and there are more suppliers of them, the price will go down, which would be great, and they'll be more accessible that way. But yeah, there is a price difference at the moment. And what was the second part?
And the second part, and this is actually, you answered about the price, just as it's coming to my mind, Jessie. So it would it just be more sustainable not to buy then? Because as I'm thinking, you said donations are not really welcome because you don't really know where they will end up. And then there's a high price tag. So unless there's a way to overcome the high price tag, what do you think could really push the prices lower? So that's the first question. And second is it just more sustainable maybe to just lower our consumer habits?
Yes, less consumption, don't consume. You do not need most of the things that are sitting in your closet, to be honest. Like, none of us do. So yeah, as far as consumption, the main, I think, key, especially on the environment side, is reduce your consumption. That would help a lot with a lot of the environmental challenges we're facing. As far as prices, no, I don't think, I guess, were you saying that rather than buying those more sustainable materials to do the cheaper ones instead because of affordability, or?
Well, also, what is actually driving the low prices then? Like, why is the differential so big? So if we're thinking about if all things were equal and you're paying the proper labor costs and you're using these higher quality materials,
Yeah.
what actually drive down prices fashion where it could have the same level of appeal as fast fashion, or at least similar level of appeal, even if it's not in the same, because fast fashion is much cheaper and you are paying for technically better quality with sustainable fashion, right? Because
Yeah.
the way the supply chain is and the work that goes into it. So what would push down the prices to increase that consumer willingness to switch?
Yeah. I think one key challenge there is a lot of the sustainable or ethics startups that are coming out. There's some really great ones. they don't tend to last as long because they don't have the same resources as the big brands, but also a lot of them are targeting the same business models in a way, or business strategies, I'll say, different business models, but looking for the same business strategy of growth, of trying to get high profit margins. And because of those factors, the prices stay high, and it's harder to do because their marginal costs are are different. So I think part of the challenge there is changing what business models look like, changing what a good business model looks like. You don't need to have hundreds of stores. That doesn't need to be your priority. You don't need to be luxury, for example, or raking in a super high profit margin. Yeah, I think those are some of the key things we're seeing there. But yeah.
Jessie, and I'm just going to ask you one more question. This is more of your outlook in light of the pandemic and everything that's going on. And now we're seeing second waves across the world. How has this impacted workflow in a sustainable fashion, and how do you anticipate that to be further evolving in the post-COVID and that post-pandemic world?
Yeah, I think we were fairly optimistic about getting back to business, and that getting back to business didn't need to be the same, that there was a chance to start working again with supply chains and with, you know, that dynamic between workers, the environment, and companies, and approaching business in a new way, because this is unprecedented. We don't know what the future looks like considering COVID. So there's a way or a hope that we can shape it, business overall, in a different way. So I'm not sure how well that is going to go, as we've seen a lot of stores are opening up, a lot of supply chains are opening up, and is there change actually being made? Is business working in a different way despite all the initial conversations? I'm not personally seeing that. So that's something to keep in mind going forward. How are we actually going to take care of these issues? Because climate change is not going away. So just because we ignore it for a little bit and focus on our profit margins or getting those back up to speed, that doesn't mean some of the crucial things that are not even sneaking up on us, are already here and very much a danger, are going away. So we still need to focus on those issues. My outlook at the moment is that there are going to be a lot more opportunities in this field. I do think it's growing, mainly because it's a necessity, and businesses are realizing that, not only from the current climate crisis, which I mentioned, or the moral obligation that some businesses are beginning to recognize or accept responsibility for, but because consumers are pushing for it, some governments are pushing for it. We're seeing more legislation, as I was mentioned, not as much as I personally think would be effective. So we'll see where that goes. But at the same time, that could flip, couldn't it, depending on who is in charge and whether they are pro or against regulation, etc. So there's a lot of things that are up in the air, and they really shouldn't be, in my opinion. It should be common sense that, you know, we want to do the best we can for people, the planet, and, you know, make profit as well, rather than, okay, how do we recoup our profits, and then, you know, hopefully once we have all of that back, we can think about the other things again. So that's my kind of worry, and what I'll be watching out for in the next year or so is our businesses actually staying on track with the lofty goals they've put in place, especially in the last 10 years, or are they kind of putting that to the side because they're scrambling, you know, for profit's sake?
Well, Jessie, at least we're ending on a somewhat positive note, in that you're saying the market is growing and there will be opportunities in this field. So I will encourage our viewers to reach out if they want to get connected with Jessie to grow their network in this space.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, as you mentioned, it's super important in any field, but especially in one like this that's new and that's growing. So I want to thank you so much for joining me in this episode of Casting Light.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jaylon. And I guess just last words, it's definitely an exciting space to work in. So if you have any questions, feel free to get in touch. Happy to answer any questions. I want more people to do it because I enjoy it so much. And I think it's a great way to, make a living and also help people. It's amazing. So,
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. It
yeah.
was really